everyone. Welcome to my PowerPoint presentation. My topic for today is strengthening the professional identity of counselors. First and foremost, I choose this topic because I felt that I can relate to the topic. Because as counselors in training, I often have questions in terms of what is it that we do. Well, I do understand that there are some requirement that falls under the counseling field as to what counselors or guidance counselors do on a daily basis. But when this field where there are so many specialty that falls under the counseling field, it's important that we understand or we develop a sense of commonality within the profession. It's important that we understand our roles as counselors and also recognizing one's role in representing the counseling profession. So in doing this research, there were several questions that comes to mind while doing it. And the first question is, I remember from our previous chapter throughout this semester, we read about how Eric Stone talks about who we are. This is a questions that these questions lie within this topic because who are we as counselors? What are our roles? What are our responsibilities? How do we understand the type of job that we are doing? What are the ethics what are some of the ethics that are required, the models that are required, some form of standard that are required for this field? Are there any credential and certification? Do we need to advance ourselves in terms of getting involved into the community, sign up for workshop in order for us to ethically perform our job to the best of our ability? And so these are the questions that I will get to talk about within my presentation. First and foremost, now to answer the question, what is professional identity? Broad and Myers, 1999, described professional identity as a cognitive frame of reference from which counselors carry out professionals' roles and responsibility. They also suggested that professional identity evolves over time, functioning as a frame of reference in which individuals reach an understanding of their chosen field in association with their own self-concept. Further, they suggested this frame of reference assists individuals in verbalizing their philosophy, their approach, and responsibility to others within and outside of the profession. Likewise, an article written by Spurgeon et al. 2012 poses this question: does counseling have an identity? And so if I were to read this question at first, I would think it's silly because we have to have an identity. We must have, when working in any profession or when doing any job, one must have an identity. One must have a job responsibility just so that they can follow in order to effectively do their work. One must label oneself as professional. You have to be able to put a word into it. One must be engaged in the integration of professional skills, attitude, engage in professional community. Researchers have suggested that professional identity are established as counselors cultivate attitude about the professional roles, involvement within the profession, ethical standard, and learning style that reinforce high level cognitive functioning. Involvement within the profession include anything like being engaged in your community, getting connected with the ASCA, any professional counseling. Are you a member of any professional counseling? Are you staying up to date as to what's really happening within the profession? Are you abiding by the ethical code? Do you have a learning style that can advance your knowledge of how you see the profession? So these are all the things that when we think about professional identity, we think about who are we? And this goes back to what I said before about Erickson when he talks about the development. He poses the question of who we are. We must be able to define ourselves, to find our role. Wu Nguyen et al. Believe that a strong professional identity among counselors is important for these three reasons. First, because they increase the likelihood of ethical performance. They create an advanced awareness of your counseling role, and they give an opportunity for this profession to survive. So these are the things that when we think about being a professional, having a professional identity, we must reflect on these things. We must reflect on finding our own self. What are the things that we are doing we shouldn't be doing? What are the things that fall under appropriate and non-inappropriate duties? Are we abiding by those rules? Because every counseling field, whether it's mental health or school counseling, we both have different ethical rules that we abide by. Once we define these things, once we find them, we can say we are now better equipped to have a professional identity. Now, what is the importance of a professional identity? The importance of professional identity is so important. And so Wu Nguyen et al. 2017 believed that a strong professional identity was so important for three reasons. He believed that having a strong professional identity among school counselors allowed the counselor to increase the likelihood of the ethical performances. He believed that having a strong professional identity also allowed counselors to have an advanced awareness of the counseling role. But also, having a strong professional identity allowed this profession to survive. And now to go back to what I said, to go back to the ethical performances. So once you have a strong professional identity about the counseling field, you're now able and aware of the ethical standard, the national state level model that are required for you to effectively perform, for you to better help your client. An advanced awareness of counseling role is anything that you being you keeping yourself updated about the current trends that are out there, um, that you need to know as counselor in order to do your job accordingly. You participating in workshop, you taking part in you taking part in any advanced certificate that are required, but also are you a member of any professional counseling is also part of ways of you being able to advance your awareness of the counseling role. Last, doing these two things, again, as a result, the counseling profession will be able to survive for a long time to come. Because not only you're following the ethical guidance that are accessible for you, but also you are keeping yourself informed regarding the profession. So now the importance of this, of having a professional identity, um, beside these three things mentioned by Wu et al. 2017, there's evidence to suggest that school counselors, according to Synodi 2014, they are not practicing as the profession indicate, both in terms of the ASCA national model and the Education Trust Transforming School Counseling Initiative. And so addressing this whole confusion, diffusion, whole ambiguity, it's an important step, both at the individual level, at the school level, at the district, state, and national level, are ways to help strengthening the professional identity of school counselors, according to Ashramovich et al. 2013. So, we now aware that being in possession of a sound professional identity is important, not just for the individual growth of the counselors, but also for the profession itself, because it's create that solidarity of the counseling profession. We want to make sure we have that common ground, that common rule that we are abide of when we are providing services to our client. We want to be able to have that unified goals in hand. Because to alleviate these incongruences of the identity of the profession, we must understand and be able to appreciate, or possibly working to reconstruct our responsibility as to what we do. We must be able to convey that message to our client and say, here, this is what I do. So, throughout my research, I came across the PISC, which stands for Professional Identity Scale and Counseling. So, in hope that all members of the counseling profession, in hope that they all share a common vision for the development of the profession as professional identity, it represent the profession in its future direction. Um, they came up with this scale among counselors' professional identity. They explore characteristics across school counseling students, counseling practitioners, and counselors educators. Then they developed this scale, which consists of 6 domains. The first one is to demonstrate knowledge of the profession. So this is important because we must understand, we must be able to articulate our skills, our knowledge of what we know. And in order for us to do that, we have to have an identity. Then the second one is being able to articulate what we know about the profession, the way we see the profession, the way we think about the profession. We have to voice it out. We have to be able to elaborate on it. Then we must establish expertise required of member of the profession and understand member professional world. They must have certain expertise that are needed for us to fully, to effectively help our client. Certain requirement, certain standard that must be followed. Then we must validate the attitude toward the profession, not only to ourselves, but also to the profession. We must prove that we possess these things, the skill set, the knowledge, the expertise. Also, we must be engaged in professional behavior of members. Those behavior could be anything such as taking part in activity that ASCA are calling appropriate, and not those that are inappropriate, because those inappropriate ones tend to create more confusion, ambiguity. Engaging in those activities, it's important. For example, if a school counselor is asked to provide services to a particular student who is experiencing bullying, the counselors must be able to provide, while also informing the student that she has been suspended from school from that behavior. There's two things within this example. One, you have to provide services to a student who is being bullied. Then you have to tell that student that she's being suspended because of due to that behavior. So now the question is, what do you think is going to happen? Most likely that counselor might be confused. The counselors may end up experiencing word conflict. This is what ASCA thinks, and this is such a great example from ASCA 2012. Because they believe that word ambiguity occurs when some of the duty listed as inappropriate are included as part of the counselor's responsibilities. Because as the duty, as the counselor experiences word ambiguity, that often happens when the duty is non-counseling related. But yet the counselor is doing it. And so we must engage in professional behavior expected of members and interact with other professionals in the field. Learn how they're doing. If they have experience with certain, issue with students, how do they deal with it? What have they done in order for you to have an idea what to do? So this professional identity scale was really important, and so I choose it because I wanted to talk about it. And I must say, this was the first time I actually came across this scale. I never knew it existed prior to this research. What is the impact that the ideology of strengthening the professional identity of counselor has on counselors? What's the impact of this discussion on counselors? According to an article written by Murdoch et al. 2012, Gale and Austin 2003 pointed out that although the school counseling profession has a code of ethics, an accrediting body to govern preparatory program, and credentialing and licensing standard, these efforts have done little to promote counselors' sense of professional identity or to distinguish counselors from other mental professionals. And this goes back to what I said before, which was because of the presence of so many different counseling identity, this causes problem for counselors um, to being able to strengthen their their identity or present to the public as one unity profession. There are so many fields in the counseling with so many specialty that fall under that umbrella. And so school counselor may wrestle with essential identity issue, which is role confusion. Again, I spoke about it. Professional school counselor may experience some role confusion if they do not adhere to national and state model that promote them as leaders, advocates, collaborators, and researchers. This is an article written by Gibson et al. 2012. The role confusion is going to happen if school counselors they do not abide by the national and state model that promote them as leaders and advocate for the student. Collaborators and researchers. In order for them to avoid being confused about their responsibility, they must apply those guidelines, those state and national guidelines, state model. They must abide by it. Likewise, Murdoch et al. 2012 argued that a lack of clear professional identity contributes to confusion among counselors in training, which is me, of course. And this is why I said from the beginning of my presentation that I felt that I can relate. Because I often question as to what am I supposed to be doing? Reading books and doing those research bring about so many questions. Do I know what my role is? What's inappropriate? There must be a line as to what we need to do or what not to do. So with that, these issues speak to the need to engage counselors in more purposeful identity development. This is what Murdoch et al. 2012 believe. We must create a sense of purpose for this profession. Why are we doing it? Why engaging in duties that are not in alliance to our profession? And this goes back to this sense of creating an identity for ourselves and the profession. We must know where the lines start and where it stops. And there's this need of creating a solidarity among the counseling. Ashramovic et al. 2013, he stretched on the need for all counseling specialty to converge around a common counseling identity. And the reason to that is because doing that will help the public to understand the appropriate role of professional school counselors. Because the public doesn't have the knowledge, the necessary knowledge to understand what we do. We must stress this need. We must have that unity, that commonality. We must follow the same rules that are set for our profession. Mental health school counselors, they often have different rules, different guidelines that are required for them. They must have some principle. The principle must be followed when working. What principles should we abide by when we are doing school counseling, when we are providing school counseling services to our students, when we are providing services for our student on behalf, when we are talking to our parents on behalf of our student? We must engage in the things that are required to begin self-labeling ourselves professional. So another impact on the counselors following this whole confusion is that counselors, educators may be affected by their own values, by their own belief, perception about counselor's identity when acculturating students to the profession. Imagine if you were to be counselors, you having an intern come into your office. Now you're faced with your own belief. You're faced with your own perception about your identity because you don't know how to articulate that in a way that the counselors in training will be able to understand. Counselors may also be affected by the way they see the profession. Again, the value, the belief, the perception, the way you see the profession. All of this can affect you. And so, being aware of these things and the impact on counselors, on our world, is important to have that kind of atmosphere, that kind of environment where unity is required. And unity is important because when we think about it, having that commonality will help us to better serve our client. It's important to have that. Because we must follow the state and national professional school counseling organization to help us to find ways to promote our unique counseling skill set to our client. We must elevate what we do as counselors, whether it's through training, workshop, but also practicing behavior that are in accord with our duty. We must focus on duty that we are qualified to perform. That's what Askamovish believe. He believed that school counselors must focus on duty that other school personnel are required. School counselors should not focus on duty that other school counselors are qualified to perform, because we all have our own qualification. So this is where the commonality come from. One commonality among the various specialties. It's important to strengthen our identity and presenting ourselves as one profession. These are the two core principles that affect counselors. It's affected in so many ways. There are other sub-principles as well, but to stay within the topic, the two core principles affected the professional identity of counselors are, first, the strengthening identity and presenting ourselves as one profession. We don't want to deviate. We want to have a line. And these are all the important things. It's evident to abide by this professional identity. It has to be. Given that other helping profession also provide mental health counseling, it is challenging for professional counselors to achieve recognition specifically as counselors. This comes from an article written by Werner et al. 2013. That's what he thinks. Because of all the other helping profession, it is an issue for counselors to gain that recognition. So there's a need for a clear counselor's identity in order for that recognition to happen among mental health services providers. Throughout my presentation, I spoke about the third-party insurance and the Medicare reimbursement. I talk about how we have to be able to articulate our role to the insurance company in order for us to get reimbursement. So with that being said, a lack of recognition can create challenges, such as the exclusion from third-party insurance and from Medicare reimbursement. That in turn will obstruct client or our student from receiving counseling-specific services and professional counselors from achieving viable incomes. There's an evidence to that. Being able to define who we are as counselors says a lot, to the point where if we don't do anything about it, our own clients are going to be affected. If we do not achieve that recognition, our clients are going to suffer. We must be able to explain as counselors our role to others, our role to our employer, our role to other peer mental health professionals, our role to our legislators, our role to our insurance board, because we need to be paid. We have to be paid for our services. It's a win-win situation. If we're not getting paid for our services, our client can't receive services. It's simple. But in order for us to receive reimbursement, we need to be prepared to explain that role to others. But most importantly, we must also be able to explain that role to our client. We must be able to provide evidence that support the claim that the independent of the profession are effective in helping our client. That's what Renault et al. 2013 believed in. And it makes perfect sense. We have to provide empirical evidence. We have to have data in hand to show what we have done and how effective it is to our client. Like I said before, as leaders, advocates, and researchers, we are equipped to provide evidence of the effectiveness of our counseling strategies. And to do that, we must first have an identity. We must first start by building this identity. And with providing the evidence, the empirical evidence, that may contribute in increasing the confidence that the legislator, or the mental health professional, your potential employee, a confidence of insurance panel as they consider the value of your counseling services to a client as a reimbursement services. Once they have the confidence of your services, they have the confidence of the value of your services, they are now able to consider its value, the value of counseling overall, as a reimbursable services. Until then, there's always going to be challenge. We must prepare to explain our world to all of these entities: employer, mental health professional, legislator, insurance board, and our client. We have to. Now, the second point impact on our client is, if we don't do all these things that I just mentioned, we're going to have difficulty to advocate for our client and the profession as itself. So being able to do all of that, being able to have a role, being able to articulate, it's important. I understand, although the professional identity development is a long-term journey, it requires that some possess some skill, some qualification, whether it's a certification, licensure, or any other form of education. We have to articulate our role. Role diffusion and role ambiguity is going to impact our profession if we don't define who we are, if we don't define our role. Professional school counselors, they must create an opportunity to clarify that and advance their role. They must focus on this unique counseling skill of counselors to be the next step of this profession. Eventually, once they do that, perhaps by addressing the impact that role diffusion, role ambiguity, schools counselor may then be able to distinguish and strengthen the professional identity. And as a result, having a more effective impact on the client, on the student, and the people they serve as a whole. Thank you so much for listening.